there are some big system shifts ahead of us. And they're pushing the narrative towards green renewables. How do you see this green wonderland they are creating from out of a touristic point of view?
I'm painfully aware of the climate changes and that we are standing in front of a crisis that claims actions. And I fully support the idea of green electricity, of course. The problem is that there is no such thing as green electricity as long as the production is done at the cost of the land, the livelihood, and the culture of the indigenous people.
Wow, they're massive.
Wind turbines are surprising machines. You know, I'm an engineer by degree, so I used to love these things. But you know, each turbine takes about 30 truckloads to get here. Steel towers, plastic blades. The blades of a turbine actually are a little bit like an airplane wing, but they're made with layers and layers of bisphenol A plastic. Usually around a core of carbon fiber or balsa wood from the Amazon. And then on the outside they put some kind of an epoxy paint or something along those lines. Actually over time they degrade, just like a propeller on a boat or a propeller on a plane. So over the life of a turbine they're throwing out kilos and tons of microplastics. These turbines are 140 meters up to the generator, and then each blade is approximately 80 meters long, weighing 20 tons. The generator on top is probably another 60 tons. There's about 100 or 120 tons, so the equivalent of maybe 120 cars on top of this steel tower. And then what lurks beneath is a massive raft of concrete. Thousands of tons of concrete down there, massive hole. And you know, this is what they call progress. It's always carbon dioxide, always carbon dioxide. No talk about poisoning the planet through heavy metals. No talking about poisoning the planet through plastics. You know, if you stop burning fossil fuels, but you keep making plastics, you still kill the planet. It's crazy. Insanity. Yeah, so you can just see the scale.
These steel towers are being produced in China. The reason? It's cheap. They're manufactured in coal-fired steel plants, as we're being told, not so environmental friendly. Made in China and shipped in large cargo ships all the way to Sweden. Driven hundreds of kilometers through the forest and finally be constructed to last 20 years. Just to produce some electricity. And all the energy that went into it could be used for other things.
You know, this is the reality of wind farms. Devastation. Clearfeld. Up. This is wind farms. I just thought you'd like to see how they line them up. Line them up. Cut them down, rows and rows, ready for the machines to come and collect them to be liquefied, shredded, whatever they get used for. And you can see they're gonna be blasting this out. Ooh, that's scary. Those are all explosive holes. as you can see, this isn't pretty. But if it's hidden away and people don't see it, people don't have to deal with it. This used to be the top of a hill. They blasted it away with great violence. One of the things about wind farms that I'm learning is that there's a lot of violence involved in wind power. Starting from how it's made, through to where the minerals come from that they use in the supply chains, through to those who speak out, questioning whether this makes sense.
It's not a surprise. Windmills heavily rely on critical minerals: neodymium, praseodymium, and dysprosium. And these rare earth elements rely on a volatile and Chinese concentrated supply chains. It delivered 70% of the global demand in 2018. The good news: the Chinese market will go wild. The bad news: it's damaging a lot more than it will fix.
内蒙古的包头是中国最大的稀土生产基地。尽管稀土是珍贵的矿产资源，但是污染危害性却非常大。
The environmental impact of the extraction is estimated to be more damaging than fossil fuel extraction due to the toxic effluent emissions and waste generated from the intensive mining activity. Tons of radioactive waste is generated as a result of the refinement of the minerals. It has impacted the access to fresh water and food production in local communities surrounding the mines. In some regions, vegetation has stopped growing. Cattle have died from toxins in the soil, and drinking water has been contaminated. But there's more. Windmills also need cobalt. A lot. Again, a rare mineral. 70% of the world's supply comes out of the cobalt mines of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. You know, that African country, which strangely enough is in a bloody conflict for generations. To say it in less words, we're creating a bit of a mess. And no, we're not saving the planet with it.
You're in the city, in your comfortable space, and you don't know what's going on in the middle of the forest. When I was sitting in my office in London, I used to finance wind farms, and I believed in this, but I didn't know. And as soon as I got more information and I started looking behind the propaganda, I couldn't believe it. I had cognitive dissonance, and I never thought I would be that kind of person who would just ignore something. So then I went into it, and I've come into these wind farms now. I've looked at the devastation. I've spoken to the people who build them. They even admit that this is ridiculous, but they're getting paid and they've got bills to pay, so they just go along with it. But at some point we're all going to look back and say, why were we such idiots?
So yeah, this should save the planet.
If this saved the planet, sign me up. I'd grab a shovel. I'd be digging here. But now that I know that this is actually going to destroy the planet, I'm raising the alarm. Every time I go out and talk to someone, I'm trying to make them convince me that this makes sense. No one's convinced me yet. Let me give you an overview of what I like to call the front line. I live here, Boyvatnet. There were some wind farms when I first arrived here, but I didn't see them because they were hidden quite far away. Yeah? And then I discovered that there were a total of 10 wind farms around me. And then the first one that I discovered by accident, which was Björkvatnet, is here. I have a court case against that in the Supreme Court. But then there's also Höxjön. This one is owned by Jamkraft and Person Invest. I have a court case against them as well. But there are a number of other wind farms, and they all seem to be coming closer and closer to Borvatnet. It's like an army marching closer and closer. And I had to ask myself, why? Why here? Why so many wind farms? All these companies wanting to build wind farms here, where it's not windy, but it's remote. So I wondered, is this really about saving the climate, or could there be a different motivator? So this is Björkvatnet, 33 turbines, and it's being built by a company called Infravia, French private equity house. They talk about this as being their gift to the world. You know, it's going to save the planet, going to save climate. What's a French company doing in the remote forests of Sweden? However, you can't build a wind farm on your own. And it turns out that this wind farm was originally developed by General Electric, just that little company from America that needed a place to launch their new prototype mega turbine. And they found a remote place in the middle of the Swedish forest to do that. Of course, they couldn't build it alone. So they found a company called Stenger and Ibsen, which is a Danish company. They came here, not with a scalpel, you know, because this is delicate forest, and actually it's peat forest, and peat is so important if you care about the climate. It's also so important if you care about the environment. But they came here with basically a sledgehammer and a chainsaw and just hacked up this place. Of course, you can't build a wind farm without someone to take the electricity, and in this case, the poster child is Google. They are going to save the world with a wind farm. Why do they need it? Oh, well, Google's building a new data center for the cloud in Finland, 1,000 kilometers away.
So the electricity here will partly go to Finland?
Yes, most of it will go to Finland. And why is it going to Finland? Because it's cheap.
Why doesn't it stay in Sweden?
Sweden doesn't need it. Sweden met its 2030 renewable energy target in 2018. This place is full of hydroelectric from 1930 and 1940s. So they don't need the electricity. And actually most people don't realize that a lot of wind farms and other renewable energy projects are to feed new infrastructure that was never there before. So it's not even fixing, you know, the existing energy. It's all new. But of course, Infravia can't build it on its own. Infravia doesn't have any money. They're just a manager. So they have to find people. They have a fund in Luxembourg because it's good for tax, you know, tax avoidance. And they found investors who are happy to put their money into Luxembourg to get a tax efficient way of doing business. This wind farm will never make money. You know, these wind farms are designed to make losses, so they don't pay taxes here. They take all that money to Luxembourg, so you can get, you know, you can get the maximum profits. Who did they find? They found Munich Re, one of the largest reinsurance companies in the world that just talks about how great it is for the environment. They're from Germany. Of course, Munich Re is not alone. This is a super secret Luxembourg fund, as most Luxembourg funds are. You know, you don't want to know who's tax avoiding because it doesn't look so good. But they got themselves the Oslo City Pension Fund from Norway, W&W, a pension and insurance company in Germany, and finally a Dutch company, the Physiotherapists Pension Fund, invested in the remote forests of Sweden. I wrote to all of them and said, hey, do you know what people are doing with your money? You know, maybe they're not telling you the truth. None of them really cared. So, you know, of course you can't build a wind farm without banks. BNP Paribas, a top bank. More banks, Dutch bank, ABN AMRO. Another French bank, SocGen. And finally, I discovered that the fund in Luxembourg has an SDG-linked equity facility. That means they borrow the money, you know, even for the little bit that they're supposed to put in themselves. I said, yes, HSBC, the bank I worked for. I wrote to my old boss and I said, hey, you guys are the top, you know, the pinnacle of sustainability. An SDG-linked, so Sustainable Development Goals linked facility. what if they're lying and it's not sustainable? They basically said, hey, you know, we're not really that bothered what they do on the level. We just take an average and, you know, we just look at it from a, an umbrella perspective. So again, you know, no one cares about the detail. It's just about the profits and, you know, the image. And that really hurt. But of course, I thought, hey, you know, there's a United Nations of players here. The United Nations is actually involved. InfraVia proudly wears the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment badge, which is supposed to be the gold standard that this investor actually cares and that he's honorable and trustworthy with regards to his sustainability standards. I wrote to them and said, hey, InfraVia is misusing your, you know, badge of honor. And the CEO, Fiona Reynolds, came back and said, look, we spoke to the company. They said everything's okay. They did their paperwork on time and they paid their fee. So therefore, we're not going to do anything else. You know, I understand there's a lot of money at play here, but, you know, all of this just seems to be smoke and mirrors. You know, sustainability is just distracting you. You know, you hear the words, you don't actually look at the detail. And the only conclusion I could come to, based on all of these players, what they're doing, looking at the projects, looking at the actual impacts, the benefits, it's just all about money.